We should.
Okay. Thank you.
Bit of deep clean.
All right, I'd like to welcome our next witnesses. Ms. Sarah Ruberto, Ms. Jacqui Hemsley, and Ms. Jessica Dodwell, and Ms. Niomi Sands. I'll have to get each one of you to be sworn, perhaps starting with Ms. Ruberto, because you're on the top of my list here. We might get you to state your full name, position, and swear either an oath or an affirmation.
Sarah Ruberto, Business Manager, Marketing Events and Culture at Goulburn Mulwaree Council. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Ms. Hemsley.
My name is Jacqui Hemsley, Manager, Arts, Culture and Tourism at Lake Macquarie City Council. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Ms. Dodwell.
Jessica Dowdell, Lifelong Learning and Audience Engagement Coordinator for Lake Macquarie City Council. I solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Nothing but the truth. Thank you. Ms. Sands.
Niomi Sands, Gallery Director, Grafton Regional Gallery, Clarence Valley Council. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Starting again with you, Ms. Ruberto, would you like to make a short opening address, maybe limiting it to at most 2 minutes?
Sure. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Goulburn Mulwaree Council has seen great support from the New South Wales Government in recent years towards arts infrastructure development, having received $4.9 million in state government funding for the development of our Performing Arts Centre and $297 for the conservation of a heritage museum. Whilst grant programs focused on the development of arts infrastructure are important, there is little to no funding available to support increasing operational requirements and risks associated with museums and galleries and their significant and unique collections. Fires and floods have highlighted the risks in the lack of disaster preparedness across the state for the arts, which lack funding to address this need. COVID has taught the sector the importance of embracing technology to remain relevant and present. For many in the sector, this is not an option unless opportunities for education and access to funding become available. There are increasing funding pressures on local government, particularly with cost shifting from the state government and the rate cap. Museums, galleries and libraries are often the services that suffer because of this, with funding reallocated to what the community demand and consider more essential services. The importance of the sector for the visitor economy, community wellbeing and livability of destinations cannot be underestimated. Results from the National Arts Participation Survey highlight the importance of arts and creativity to child development, education, local business and skills for the future. We welcome and encourage a museum strategy for the state, a strategy focused on the role of the state institutions and their relationship with regional museums, with appropriate consultation from the outset. Likewise, an up-to-date arts policy that draws on the role of the regions in the development and delivery of sector growth opportunities, including infrastructure, digitisation, education and conservation. We strive to deliver museum quality exhibitions, storage and display requirements with limited funding. Currently, there is no available funding to museums to assist with operations. Access to additional program funding is required for both museums and galleries. Capital and grant funding should be increased and consideration given to an annual cultural subsidy. The current model of funding from the State Library to regional public libraries is efficient and effective, enabling regional public libraries to use the subsidy to cater for individual needs whilst taking a strategic approach. The regional arts communities are full of passionate, dedicated and innovative staff and volunteers who work tirelessly on exhibitions, public programs, collections, interpretation, digitisation and much more. They do this with varying levels of financial support and investment and welcome the opportunity to be actively consulted, engaged and part of the decision-making process for the future of the arts sector. and the development of an equitable funding model to ensure this important sector is funded appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. Either Ms Hemsley or Ms Dowdell, would you like to make a short opening statement?
Yes, we'll be sharing our statement, so I'll be going first and then we'll have Jess, if that's all right. In 2018, Council supported an internal restructure and created the Arts, Culture and Tourism team. This new converged team was created to improve the value and provision of contemporary visual arts and performing arts, music and dance, urban and public art, place active literacy and social history, heritage and cultural collections for our community. Since that time, ACT has recruited 22 new creative professionals, with another 4 in the coming 12 months. With an operating budget of $14.3 million and a cultural infrastructure works program that is self-funded to the value of nearly $20 million, the team is in growth and is reflective of council and the community's increased value and commitment to growing culture and creative capital. These upcoming major projects have been fully funded through Lake Macquarie City Council, outside generous contribution through the Creative Fund through Create New South Wales of $2.1 million towards the Multi-Art Pavilion. This space will be opening in July 2021. In addition, there's 3 additional co-located spaces for collection, exhibition and community at Windale, with the digital and community exhibition space and library worth $9 million, the Sugarloaf Library Museum, a converged library and museum space at value at $7 million, and the Rathmines Theatre and Heritage Centre. ACT is a converged team where programs are collaboratively curated and resourced based on customer focus and deliverables rather than facilities. For ACT to meet its future ambitions in developing cultural collections, quality cultural spaces, and continuously engage with our community, we would like a government to review and develop strong, collaborative and innovative statewide policy to enable the sector to thrive and to become more resilient.
Our submission supports a statewide museums and gallery strategy to guide a coordinated and collaborative approach to the sector's recent COVID recovery. And as a minimum, address key areas for growth in the sector, such as infrastructure, digitisation, education, preservation, and improving professional development opportunities for cultural professionals within the state. In the case of Lake Macquarie, we've gone from one facility that meets collection exhibition guidelines and climate control standards to, in 2 years, we will have 5 facilities with a proactive approach to growing the city's heritage, visual arts and multi-arts collections. These facilities and their success will be greatly improved if there was increased access to state collections through object loans or touring. These costs are currently inhibitive or we're unable to access due to regional facility collection management limitations. It is the experience of Lake Macquarie City Council that we have both been able to access and unable to access collections in line with larger institutions' policies. The need for considerable infrastructure has inhibited our ability to access collections. While we are self-funding to improve these collections, the restrictions still remain. We are seeking government to improve the ability of lending and borrowing institutions, revise the collection climate control conditions in line with international standards, lift the overall capabilities of the sector through investment in cultural facilities and professional development opportunities, incentivise innovation in the sector through the display of significant collections in regional locations. We are very proud of our council and our community's commitment towards the programs and projects that ACT and Lake Macquarie is developing, and consider the future for the sector is very positive.
Thank you. And last, Ms. Niomi.
Thank you so much. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and acknowledge the Bundjalung peoples, the traditional custodians on the land in which I am situated. I pay tribute and respect to elders both past and present of the Bundjalung, Gumbaang, Ear and Yagal nations in which our council boundaries lie. I'd like to thank the committee for the invitation to speak at the government's inquiry into the management and of the powerhouse and other museums and cultural projects within New South Wales. The Clarence Valley has a vibrant cultural and heritage sector that comprises of local and regional library services, an active Aboriginal community, including the visual arts, storytellers, language and dance groups, community theatre groups, several dance groups, a conservatorium of music, a regional gallery, private galleries, the Plunge Cultural Festival, a number of volunteer community museums that are importantly supported by the Museum Advisory Program, which is co-funded by the Museums and Galleries New South Wales and the Clarence Valley. Also to note, the gallery, which I oversee, provides professional development for our local museum sector through our Museums Unpacked program. And we also provide professional development for our local creatives through our Artists Unpacked program. The Valley has an active creative community and an emerging cultural economy, turning practice into business, which we are very proud of. Through Create New South Wales Regional Cultural Fund, the government has funded an exciting $7.6 million expansion of the Grafton Regional Gallery, which I'm happy to report is tracking on time and on budget. This grant also funded the Lawrence Museum. They've received $186,000 for renovations through this fund. In addition, the Yamba Museum has received grant funding of $250,000 through Regional Communities Program. It's important, given the government's investment in new infrastructure, that it is backed by ongoing program funding. At present, Grafton Regional Gallery receives, through Create New South Wales, a $70,000 contribution to our annual program, which is less than 10% of our programming costs for the gallery. 4 of our 7 museums within the Clarence Valley are actively, seeking funds for grant funds for their ongoing projects. But mainly this sector is run entirely through the goodwill of our volunteers. To effectively support regional communities and to provide access to outstanding arts, cultural and heritage experiences, state-funded museums and galleries require additional resourcing. To that is provided to assist regional organisations through their access. We'd like to see access to professional services for the sector and access to state collections through touring exhibitions and collection loans. This allows regional galleries and museums to present outstanding and cultural experiences to regional communities otherwise not available within regional New South Wales. Additional support and funding is required for the volunteer museum sector to ensure the longevity and sustainability of these organisations that are the keepers of our local histories and stories. Increased support in the form of partnerships between regional organisations and significant state and national arts organisations would foster the cultural economy. It would support our creative industries and make regional New South Wales a more livable region for our communities. Thank you.
Questions?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to direct my first question to the 2 representatives from Lake Macquarie Council. So if you can, so you asked about a statewide, you asked for a statewide museums and galleries strategy. How would you feel about a funding structure similar to what exists for libraries in New South Wales?
My understanding with the library's funding structure is that it's per quota with population, and it also includes a subsidy that's revised with regards to capital infrastructure contribution. The question perhaps with the library services is that there is some legislation and there is a stronger state library presence with regards to that sector. My experience is that we haven't had that strong sector support through the Art Gallery of New South Wales or the state institution. If we were able to get that support, then it might be an interesting model to work through with a feasibility.
Thank you. I'll just remind the others in the Zoom that at the end of this process, we make recommendations to the government, and I'd like to find out from the representative of Clarence Valley Council, how would you feel about a structure for museums and galleries similar to what exists for libraries?
Look, I think it would be something that we really would be interested in, as Jacqui said, doing a feasibility study. Within our council, we do regional as well as Clarence Valley Library Services. So we're split between both because we have a partnership with a number of other regions within the Mid-North Coast and Rivers area. I definitely think it would be nice to have a bit more structure and a bit more support from that state level. I know that, you know, the art gallery and all the other institutions are very keen to support us, but they are restrained by their own resources. You know, they'd love to do more work regionally, but I think, again, they're facing budget issues as well as everyone else.
Thank you, Ms. Sands. Also turn to the representative for Goulburn Mulwaree Council.
Sure. It was certainly something that we would support a thorough investigation into. We find with our Goulburn Mulwaree Library that the funding model works really well, and it's not only the funding component, it is the support that is available through the state library. So from our perspective, funding is not the only answer to the problems at hand here, and ensuring that there are appropriate levels of support through a state organisation similar to the state library for galleries and museums, I think would, as well as a permanent funding model, a fixed funding model, would be a really great outcome for the regions.
A follow-up question, not a follow-up question on this, but another question. Are you familiar with the issue of the Maudslay steam engine? What is Goulburn Mulwaree Council's approach at the moment? Are you optimistic? Are you frustrated? What is your approach at the moment?
Look, we're always optimistic. I guess we are in a little bit of a holding pattern at the moment. We were in very early stages of negotiations with Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences to return the Maudslay back to Goulburn, which essentially is bringing it home. That engine did start out its life here in Goulburn at the Goulburn Brewery. So we are, as far as we have been informed, and we haven't spoken to anyone from the powerhouse for a little while now, as far as we are concerned, it is still on the table, subject to negotiations and looking at things in relation to environmental factors, where it would be housed, how it would be conserved, council's experience in relation to dealing with objects of that size.
So does Goulburn Mulwaree Council have a proposed location or a facility where they, if they were successful in returning the steam engine, do they have a proposed location?
Yes, absolutely. We have the historic Goulburn Waterworks. So that was built in Goulburn between 1883 and 1885 and operated a pumping facility that basically addressed Goulburn's first reticulated water supply. So the Waterworks actually houses two historic engines from the, I'm just going to check these dates before I tell you the wrong date, also from the 1800s. We also have the Hicargraves Engine, which is the oldest of only three left in the world. So we are in a unique position that the Waterworks, it is a rare facility. It is the only complete steam-powered municipal water supply left in its original location in the Southern Hemisphere. It's been in council's hands since way back when, in the 1800s. We have staff and volunteers and experts that manage that site, that run the engines. We do regular steaming there. So it's certainly, from our perspective, returning the Maudslay to Goulburn to be housed at the Waterworks, it would be in very, very safe hands.
Thank you. Go ahead, Tim.
Could I just ask, while we're with you in Goulburn Mulwaree, and I think all of us acknowledge the extraordinary work each of your councils do with such a limited budget, such crucial cultural institutions. One of the concerns that is reflected through all of the submissions is the lack of ongoing funding. You all celebrate the individual grants, but then you're sometimes left with a bigger institution which just requires more recurrent funding, and all of that ends up being caught by local ratepayers. What do you think the solution is, or have you got a solution to this problem with recurrent funding?
I think certainly from Goulburn Mulwaree's perspective, we are always thrilled to receive grant funding, but whilst it is a wonderful thing and we can develop and enhance and create new products and experiences for our communities and for visitors, it does leave us with something that we need to maintain. It adds additional operational costs, staffing costs, maintenance costs, and the only solution from our perspective would be some kind of permanent funding solution so that we had money. Grants are great, but they never really deal with operational requirements. They tend to mostly be around, feasibility studies or looking at different aspects of things or building something new. So something that could give us the ability to maintain what we've got, grow what we've got, grow our staff, try new things, be innovative, would be a real game changer for the sector.
And then could I go to Clarence? I mean, you've mentioned that only 10% of your recurrent funding comes from the state government. You're about to open another $7.6 million expansion of your regional gallery. Who's going to pay for the operational costs of that expanded gallery?
We don't have additional operational costs as part of our council allocation. Some of the work that's being done into the planning towards the expansion is that we have a number of, spaces that we can use for, commercial activity, if you like. So we've got some meeting room spaces which we didn't have in the current situation of the gallery. We've expanded our focus. So, for instance, we're looking further into philanthropy and expanding our philanthropy programs. The shop gets looked at as well, so that we, in a nutshell, we're diversifying our income streams to ensure that we remain sustainable. In the current space, we didn't quite have anything that could allow us to get those sustainable income streams, but I think with the new space, we will have those abilities, and we're feeling a need within our region for some of those spaces which we don't currently have.
Going back how long you've each been in the sector, but the fact that Clarence gets about 10% of its programming costs from the state government, and 90% obviously coming from local or other sources. How is that reflected historically? Has that proportion of state funding been consistent for the last few years, or has it shrunk over time? Or grown?
I guess I've been at Clarence Valley for 2 years. Previously, from that, I was in Port Macquarie, and the funding level that we get is exactly the same as what I was getting in Port Macquarie. And in the 10 years that I was in Port Macquarie, I did see an increase as we increased our programs. But I think it's stayed stable for probably the last 4 years or so.
What about the other councils? What about your proportion of state as you know, the total funding that you have for your museums and galleries? Might do Lake Macquarie?
Well, our operational budget of $1.3 million, we receive through Create New South Wales, just for our art gallery, Museum of Art and Culture, $100,000 a year. That's been stable for the last 5 or 6 years. So there is, that's not a large amount of programming funding for our cultural budget, but we're a converged team. So for us to operate the budgets for our future capital cultural works is that we created a post-construction operational plan for each of those facilities. So for council to support ongoing infrastructure and cultural facilities, we needed to incorporate sound operational business plans. And that included a business case mix of commercial, multi-use, community use, cultural activity, and education and philanthropy revenue streams as well. And we budgeted that there wouldn't be additional funding costs because of the fact that it was such a variable.
So you get less than what, a fraction of 1% of your funding from the state government in Lake Macquarie.
Yes, our programming budget for programs and directly cultural programs is about $4 million a year, and that's across events and festivals all the way through to our cultural infrastructure, cultural spaces, and it's $100,000 a year.
Okay. And so then, what about Goulburn?
So the funding our gallery receives from Create is also less than 10%. And I guess while we're talking about it, we are in a bit of a holding pattern with Create at the moment. We are, like most regional galleries, we have put in our submission for the multi-year funding, and we are still waiting. The last that we heard was that an announcement would be made in June. It is now September. We have not heard a thing. So most galleries are in the same position as us. Some will be, their current funding will finish in December, and there is no indication of any funding from Create beyond that. So we are in a difficult position. It's hard to forward plan when we are being strung out with funding decisions.
And in fact, you mentioned in your that the last time you had a funding decision, the funding agreement went from 3 to 5 years, and there was no opportunity to even review that. Can you talk us through that?
Correct. Yeah. So we had a 3-year funding from 2016 to 2018. There were some changes going on at Create at that time, and that funding agreement was extended for 1 year, and then it was extended for a further year. So from 3 to 5 years, we were stuck with the money that we had, which, we certainly wouldn't say no to that, but there was no opportunity for, despite attempts from our gallery director to have discussions with Create staff about the opportunity to bid for more funding over that 2-year extension. Those conversations didn't go anywhere. So we have been stuck with $80,000, which certainly has been wonderful to have. But as the gallery grows and our reputation grows and our programming grows, we need more money to back that up.
So it's not just June to September that you've been stuck. You've really been stuck since 2018 in a holding pattern.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask a little bit about your reflections, but if the other councils are in the same situation, they can chime in too. What are the consequences of those kind of delays? I mean, you mentioned the obvious one. Well, it's difficult to forward plan, but how does that play out in terms of the consequences for the galleries and for your cultural institutions when you don't have that certainty?
Look, it makes it very difficult to forward plan, and galleries are renowned for programming sometimes 2 to 3 years in advance, because we are engaging artists to create new works for the exhibitions that we are programming. So it puts a lot of people in limbo, and it also it can at times make councillors and senior management in local government question the viability of the sector and of libraries and galleries and museums when we are in this position that there is no guarantee of funding, and it makes them question why councils should invest so much money in local government if it appears that the state is not interested in coming to the party.
Absolutely. And the rep from Clarence and Lake Macquarie in a similar position. Are you also waiting for feedback from Create New South Wales on multi-year funding agreements?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Clarence, yes, Miss Sands, did you want to chip in first about your experiences in Clarence?
Sure. We were on an annual funding agreement, so our funding finished in December, and we applied for multi-year funding as well this round. Like at the moment, in the next couple of weeks, I need to do the programming, like the actual production of our publication for January to July. And at the moment, we're hoping we get funding, but it, you know, because we need to meet print deadlines, there's a whole number of deadlines that we just have to hope that we're going to get through and make sure that we've got other funding to cover that so that we can actually continue our standard operations, which puts us in a very tricky position because you're never 100% sure and you do need those long lead times.
Absolutely. Ms. Hemsley or Ms. Dowdell from Lake Macquarie, are you also in a similar situation? What's your experiences?
Yes, we're in the same situation. We put in funding to commence in June this year as a multi-year program for all of our facilities. So not a single facility across all of our arts, cultural and heritage programs across the city. And yes, we're in the same position we haven't heard. And the real effect is to our community in that we're not able to confirm what we can offer for them. Thinking about school programming, that has a really long lead time to ensure that schools and teachers are able to access our arts and cultural facilities. At the moment, we should be developing and offering what we will have for 2021 for all of those school students throughout Lake Macquarie. Without certainty around funding, that's an area that we can't confirm that offering. And that's just one example across exhibition programs and other facilities. So it's really about the security and the timeliness of finding out that information.
When did you put the bid in? You were waiting for a decision, obviously, at the end of last financial year. When did the bids, when did you meet the deadline and put your bid in by?
I believe it was early, end of March, yeah.
Everybody's saying March, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And can I ask a question for context? And each of the councils can please. Thing that is common, or is this COVID related, or is this what happens with funding applications from Create New South Wales and the state government? Ms. Sands?
Okay. Create had taken a lot of feedback on board about this deadlines, and when they released the requirements for this year's funding rounds, they actually had nominated when we would hear, which was the first time we'd ever seen that opportunity to find out when you might be successful. In the past, sometimes I believe we haven't found out until near December for funding in January, which again has put us in a position that we're going, oh my gosh, what are we doing? But we had seen some real change, and that I guess gave us sort of confidence and a bit of, surety that they've been listening. But I understand COVID has had a problem everywhere. But we haven't been given okay, so yes, you were meant to find out in June, but you can now find out in July. There's not been a timetable really.
Ms. Ruberto from Goulburn?
I guess my comments are very similar to Naomi's in that we have also had that same experience where we have been waiting, and that is often the case with grant funding, but the communication has probably been the major aspect that has not been handled particularly well here. If there was regular communication to say, there has been a hold up, announcements will now be made in such and such time, at least that then we can then report that up the line to our senior staff to say, we haven't heard, but we understand that this announcement is forthcoming on this particular date. So look, I think communication is critical to make sure that everyone is informed, and in the absence of that, we are all just making assumptions about what's happening with this funding, and that isn't really helping anybody.
Lake Macquarie, would you like to add?
Yes, I'm old school. I've been around since it used to be the Ministry for the Arts, which is going back a few years, and it does ebb and flow as time goes through with regards to liaison relationship with Create New South Wales. However, over the decade or so, it does seem to be a little bit more unsure now, rather than say five or so years ago, when there would be that one-on-one liaison contact. That seemed to stop, and I think some of that communication has missed the mark a little bit. So I would agree with my colleagues.
Okay, as I said earlier today, that we actually make recommendations in the final report. And how would you feel about a recommendation requiring the government to spell out guidelines for the application process and when decisions are made?
I would support that.
Likewise.
Everyone's okay.
How about a recommendation that they make a decision? I think that you kind of need it now, don't you? You need a decision now.
Okay, can I just make a quick point about that, just for the benefit of the witnesses? Obviously, there's the 50. I'm the Parliamentary Secretary for the Arts as well.
Make a decision, Ben.
So again,
Make a decision.
Come on, Ben, you can do it
Make a
right today.
Yeah,
Spell it
no,
out.
I agree with you. The communication sounds appalling, and you're absolutely right. It should be fixed. And I've already texted a number of senior people to that end. So I'm really no. That's good, right? That's exactly what these things. That's what these things should be doing. Should be actually identifying problems and getting the message through. Yeah. And so you've succeeded in that today. That's the first point. But the second point I was just going to say is we've got the $50 million COVID fund that I'm sure you're all aware of, and I suspect what's happening is that they're trying to pull that together in with the funding that councils are getting. That having been said, it's still not good enough, the communications, and you need that certainty. So I, for one, would strongly support there being more certainty for local councils so that you can do the programming and so on that you need.
We'll issue an interim report this afternoon, Ben.
We should write a letter, I think.
I think we should. Yeah, absolutely. Could I just ask Goulburn again, one of the concerns you have is about transparency about funding decisions made by Create New South Wales. And, part of the backdrop of this inquiry is a very large amount of money in the sector has gone to just the Powerhouse Museum and the opportunity costs that some of us see about that. But you also point to some other cases where substantial funding went to one organisation and there was an opportunity cost, particularly in regions where a bunch of smaller institutions lost out. And I think you talk about the funding in 2018 to the Sydney Symphony Orchestra. Could you just expand on that a little bit, Sarah?
Sure. Look, the example of the funding that went to Sydney Symphony Orchestra from our perspective is the only major issue that has been highlighted to us that we have had concern with. I guess what it does show, though, is the disparity with funding decisions that are made, and the fact that when someone is getting a big bucket of money, there's a whole heap of other people that miss out. So the current model is not as effective as it could be. And I guess I go back to the conversation we had earlier about looking at a model, whether that's along the lines of how the regional libraries are funded or whatever that looks like. But a model that is proportionate to each gallery and museum would have a much longer lasting effect across the state, rather than focusing on major organisations that take a big chunk of the pie each time and everybody else is left in the wings with very little money to do anything with, if any money at all.
No, Niomi, I see you not going to try and put words in your mouth, but could I ask you, do you think part of the problem is that grant-based funding is about announceables and ribbon cutting, and so that's a good announceable for the state government, but what's desperately needed is the kind of less sexy funding, which is just ongoing contributions? And is there too much of a focus on that ribbon cutting, grant-based funding?
I think definitely there is, we do need support that isn't in the sort of really, the big, beautiful infrastructure. Having said that, we're doing some big, beautiful infrastructure here. But, our local museums, we've co-funded the Museum Advisor program for 7 local museums, and some of them are able to, pull together funding applications. Some of them just, they don't have the expertise. We assist where we can, but we don't run those organisations. And sometimes, they need help mowing their lawns. It's down to that really, base level requirements that are, lawn mowing isn't really sexy. It's kind of, but there is a need for I guess more support and across a variety of things. And I guess it's also to understand that there isn't that expertise to write those grant applications. They're not easy. I find that it's like I have to put at least 2 months out of my schedule just aside, just so that we can do good quality grant applications. And volunteer museums don't have that expertise or even that time.
Yeah, and surely your time would running museums and galleries than filling in grant applications. And the more we can move towards recurrent funding, the more of your time can be spent doing your job. Would that be a fair observation?
Yeah.
Everyone's laughing. Is that there's a general sense and an agreement is there on that? Yeah, I see. For the transcript, everyone's nodding. Yeah.
Can I make a point? There's been a significant focus on the amount of money that's being spent on some Sydney cultural institutions, but evidence that we've heard today, and I take your point about ongoing funding, operational funding, I get that. But we've also heard in evidence from both Clarence and Goulburn councils that you're getting significant investment in infrastructure, cultural infrastructure. So that's a good thing, right?
No, they all look.
Absolutely.
Let them talk. Thank you, David. How about you let them talk for a change? How about you let them talk? Sorry.
Okay, so our
Don't tell me to
council.
settle down. Can I make a point of order? I mean, that is just offensive for that member to say that.
Through the chair, please.
I'm doing so, sir.
Okay, then I would like you to withdraw that, David.
Well, sure. And but my only observation is, if you want to take a point of order, do it through the chair.
I did that.
As you did earlier, as you did earlier across the floor. But sure, you don't need to settle down.
Your supercilious attitude doesn't befit you.
Okay.
Again.
Okay, we've just settled it, so let's go.
Sorry about that, witnesses. Naomi, did you want to comment on that?
We were really fortunate in being successful with our regional cultural fund grant, but our council had that project as part of a long-term planning. Well, not necessarily on the shelf, but we had it, there as something that if we had the opportunity that we'd actually take that up because they had already bought the property behind the gallery. So it was something that was always long-term, was an aspiration for council to extend and expand the gallery site. And I guess it's taking those opportunities when they present themselves. And I think that's why I guess local government spends so much time, and rightly so, doing long-term master plans to make sure our communities are livable for the foreseeable future.
Cool. And your the need for certainty in operational funding have certainly been taken on board. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
But could I just ask? No, I am. Could I just ask a question of each of you? And I suppose I come from this from two perspectives. One involves, in a sense, a cultural institution, and that is in terms of the regional conservatoriums of music, which face sort of parallel issues to what you're talking about. And I think they would make similar observations with the amount of money poured into the Conservatorium of Music as opposed to the various regional conservatoria. But I also come at it from the point of view of having actually been involved in a fairly successful sporting organisation in Tamworth, which was hockey, which was very good at filling in grant funding applications and did a lot better than a lot of other sports in the town. But one of the things that grant funding seems to work with, from my perspective, is organisations that are essentially autonomous from government, such as sporting organisations and, to an extent, the Conservatorium of Music. If you make it recurrent funding, whether it be for a shooting club or for a conservatorium of music or for a hockey club or indeed a library, what is the relationship between the funding body and the body that's receiving the recurrent funding? Is actually ownership then being taken by the funder of that organisation and withdrawing its autonomy?
Jeez, I lost the question in there. Was there a question in there?
No, it's a good question. You see it in lots of non-government sectors.
Yeah.
Once you become dependent on government funding,
okay,
you
now-
lose your autonomy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
Because
the question.
the funding is conditional upon meeting various criteria still. I'm just trying to work out how the model would work. Hey, Jacqui.
So I guess looking at the library funding model, it allows autonomy, it allows creativity through the support of a state organisation. So looking at the delivery of arts and cultural services across the state in the same way that library services are delivered across the state, where it isn't regional and metropolitan, there isn't a division. It's actually looking at how all those different parts function as a whole in the delivery. In the same way sporting organisations within the state function, your state sporting organisation is directly supported by your regional organisations that act as feeders to those state organisations, and the same way back again. Looking at the arts and cultural industry and separating it between regional and metropolitan doesn't really make sense when they actually need to be closer. We need to be working together in a more integrated approach where state organisations offer that support to regions, and regions are then feeding back through to the state organisations. The library model certainly does that. It allows for consistent funding. It allows for strategic planning for organisations. It allows that state level support, and then for that back and forth between the regional and the metropolitan organisations. You have both collaborative work and individual creativity happening within that model.
Well, can I, and I know others may wish to... The questions that I asked of the previous witnesses related to what I see as, in a sense, a different model that applies with, for instance, regional galleries, where rather like libraries, there seems to be, in my perception, a fairly consistent model to museums, particularly in regional and country areas, which is far more diverse. And I wonder if you would comment upon how you would provide, because I can see how you could provide recurrent funding based on a per capita basis for galleries, but I'm wondering how you would do that for the museum sector.
I think by having a very clear state policy for the museum sector would be the starting point for that. There is
I can understand that. That's well made.
Yeah. And then from within that policy, in my mind, there would be certain criteria and sub-criteria based on the level of the museum, and that could be, you know, a local government-run museum that is fully staffed by paid staff versus a community museum that is entirely voluntary-run by an incorporated association or something of that ilk. So there would need to be a range of criteria depending on the museum, because there's incredible diversity. I mean, just even within our museums here in Goulburn, the council-run museums and the community-run museums. So, look, it wouldn't be a simple fix, and it wouldn't be something that could necessarily happen quickly. But with appropriate consultation and getting the right people in the room to represent the sector, I'm sure we could come up with something.
Definitely. And I would say that, you know, by taking that more tailored approach, you could cater to, you know, the skills and development needed from the sector. So you wouldn't have the same expectations across the different areas, but you could then provide the support that they really need by using that sort of tailored approach.
two more questions. I just wanted to ask, we heard from Ms. Sands at Clarence that she thinks, for example, she might spend up to 2 months preparing grant applications to be at the standard that they need to be in order to secure funding. I just wanted feedback from Ms. Ruberto and perhaps Ms. Hemsley or Ms. Dowdell about how much time you spend or your council spend on the grant application process. How much of your time is being consumed with that?
So Goulburn's perspective, we have 2 dedicated grants staff. They're full-time staff. Their entire job is to look for grant opportunities and relate them to relevant relevant council projects that we have in the pipeline. We obviously have a bit of a wish list for the sorts of things that we're looking for funding for, but so as well as those 2 dedicated full-time staff, depending on the nature of the grant, it could involve, maybe up to 3 or 4 other staff to provide specialist input into that particular grant. So I know from our perspective with our grant applications for Create, one of our grants officers leads that application in consultation with our gallery director and our gallery officer. So there's 3 staff that pretty well, I would say, the grants officer, it would be a fair chunk of their work, and over the course of, like Jacqui, probably a couple of months to bring it all together. It would take probably 30 to 40% of their time over that 2 months to bring all that together.
Great, thank you. Lake Macquarie?
The council hasn't a dedicated grant officer. We have an internal project working group, and we work through it collaboratively, the different grants. With regards to arts, culture, tourism, events and festivals funding, it's within our team. And because we're a converged team, we have a leadership group. We have like 5 key divisions within arts, culture and tourism team, of which Jess is one of those leaders, and we meet and do those grants collaboratively. And we're very aggressive and proactive about aiming and putting in time and effort with grants, in particular the attachments and submissions. We spend a lot of time getting together feasibility reports, research projects, business cases, concept designs to try and put the best application we possibly can. And it would take a big chunk of about 7 people's FTE every year.
And just the last question I had, and one can comment on it. It's a pretty broad question, but I just wanted just a quick reflection. We only have 5 minutes left, and I don't know if others have questions. Others do, so perhaps just keep it brief. I just wanted to comment on how important are the facilities that we're talking about, these regional museums and galleries and cultural facilities, to your regional tourism offering? How significant is securing the funding to get these facilities up to scratch and presenting the best possible face for your local communities in terms of attracting regional tourism?
Extremely. As a short answer, while Lake Macquarie, we have beaches and we have the lake, but our arts and cultural facilities are second on that list to the environmental aspects of the reasons for people to visit. It's essential, especially when we're moving from an industrial city into a city that relies heavily on tourism. We're moving away from mining, so tourism is our next best economic move, and we need these facilities to present that.
Any from Goulburn or Clarence? Anything additional?
Yeah, you can take it as right. Okay, so Ms. Ruberto from Goulburn. Sorry, Rose. It's okay.
Well, you're going to get everyone to agree with you that they're essential.
Okay,
but there's a difference between you putting that on the record and their words. Their words can go into the report.
Address your remarks through the chair.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
At all times.
Yes.
Well.
Sure. So for Goulburn, heritage and cultural tourism is the main attractor of people to our destination here. And I might stress that in 2018, heritage and cultural tourism was worth $14 billion to the New South Wales economy. So I think that says it all.
Yep.
So in the Clarence Valley, it's really important, especially within Grafton itself, because
know
we've
what they're
just been
doing.
bypassed the Pacific Highway. We see the development of the regional gallery as a really a boost to the economy within the region, but it's also our museums are across our whole the whole area of the Clarence Valley, because we've quite a large council area, and each of those organisations provide, you know, economic benefit for tourism within the villages across the Clarence. So it's really essential.
Ms. Goulburn Mulwaree, I have one final question. This morning, in evidence from Michael Rolfe, Chief Executive of Museums and Galleries of New South Wales, he made reference to a theft that occurred at the Goulburn Historic Waterworks Museum. Now, that's where you indicated that if the steam engine was returned to Goulburn, it would return there. And the theft took place on February the 16th. Have there been steps to improve security there? And I understand that they were described as one-of-a-kind solid brass oil well covers. So what's the status of that, and has security been stepped up and improved?
Sure. So there were 3 brass oil well covers on one of the engines there, and one of those was stolen. It's about so big, not a big piece at all. But yes, we have increased monitoring with our staff, who are staff and volunteers who are in the pump house whenever we have people through. And we are also very fortunate that we, through the skill set of one of our volunteers, he was able to produce a replica piece to replace the stolen piece, and to look at, you would not even know that it was any different.
So can you guarantee that if the steam engine went to Goulburn, that there would be the appropriate security and measures in place?
Yes, there would be, and the reality is that is the first incident that I am ever aware of vandalism to anything within the pump house. So council takes matters like that very seriously, and we would ensure that if we wanted to get the wards lay, just like we do with the other engines, that we would make sure that the security of those was appropriate.
Could I just, at the moment, the reports that I'm getting back when I talk to people in the regions is that there are so many people wanting to visit regional New South Wales at the moment. You can hardly find a room or a booking, particularly over the holiday periods. Is that reflected in interest in the museums and galleries at the moment? Is that the sort of feedback you're getting on the ground? That there's this huge interest because people can't travel overseas, they can't travel interstate, that there's this specific interest in regional tourism?
From our perspective, yeah, there is an interest. We are, interestingly though, we are not back to our normal visitation numbers. The only exception to that would be the Rocky Hill War Memorial Museum, but it opened as a brand new museum on the 1st of June. The numbers to that site where there was an existing museum are through the roof, but certainly our gallery and some of our other sites are not, including our visitor information centre, are not as high as they would normally be pre-COVID.
Like Macquarie, Clarence?
With Lake Macquarie, we are not as high as we were pre-COVID. This time last year, we're trending at about 40% lower visitation at our regional gallery. However, we've just opened a new heritage centre space at Rathmines Theatre. So there's been a lot of strong interest, growing interest in that area.
It's a little bit of a change in demographics. Certainly over the school holiday period, our venues that were targeted at children and family holiday visitors and had COVID-safe precautions in place, the numbers were extremely high at those venues, higher than they have been in previous years over winter holiday periods. However, overall, there is a decline in numbers because people are seeking outdoor heritage trails, driving trails, opportunities that don't require them to be confined in spaces with other individuals. So there is an increase in interest, but it's a different type of interest than we have seen in the past.
At the gallery, always expected to have a very low visitation year because we've got construction fences surrounding Prentice House, so we always expected that to be a low visitation year. We did see once reopening to limited hours, we did see that there were a lot more tourism visitors because we have a tourism portal on site, so we get a bit of a gauge of what's happening tourism wise, but anecdotal evidence from our caravan parks, they were fully booked once they could rebook, they were fully booked out. So at Yamba and in other areas. So we are seeing a lot of road trip visitors to the region.
Thanks, everyone.
For today, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now have a break and come back at 2 o'clock. Thank you.